President Trump making big threats, including the threat of closing the U.S.-Mexico border. Now, he says there's an emergency at the southern border. He's described it as an invasion. He wants Mexico to do something and wants Congress to change our immigration laws. And breaking news just moments ago, the Secretary of Homeland Security just ordered more agents to the border. Believe it or not, that is not all. The U.S. State Department also now pulling aid from Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador on President Trump's orders. Lots to break down this hour. I am joined by NBC News White House correspondent Hans Nichols and MSNBC's Jacob Soboroff. Hans, let me begin with you with a lot of the moving pieces that we just ran through. President Trump calling on his administration to close the border in the past. We have a couple examples of that. Watch this.
I would call in the military and I would seal off the border. I would close up the border.
It gets to a level where we are going to lose control or where people are going to start getting hurt. We will close entry into the country for a period of time until we can get it under control. The whole border. I mean, the whole border.
All right, so you heard there several times. This time, though, some are saying it's different. How real is the threat this time?
I mean, it's different because this appears to be a whole-of-government approach to sealing the border. We've just heard from the Department of Homeland Security. They are redeploying, they're calling it a surge, an additional 750 border agents to the sections of the border where they feel most stressed. Here's Secretary Nielsen's statement. She's saying the crisis at our border is worsening, and DHS will do everything in its power to end it. We will immediately redeploy hundreds of CBP personnel to the border to respond to this emergency. We will urgently pursue additional reinforcements within DHS and the interagency. That is a clear indication that President Trump, his entire cabinet, wants to talk about this border issue for the coming week. He has a busy schedule here, but they're redeploying troops, not troops, I should say border agents. He does have some National Guard troops that are still down there. At the same time, and here's the big caveat on this, is that they haven't fully priced in here at the White House, the economists, they haven't fully figured out what the cost will be to the U.S. economy if they do seal that border. Just earlier this morning, talking to Kevin Hassett, the CEA chair, it's clear they haven't run the numbers on this. So in some ways, this is a whole government approach. You have the State Department threatening that $500 million, cutting back that aid. Now you have DHS redeploying. You have the president on Twitter and public statements saying that he wants to do this. But I don't think they've fully come to terms here about what the impact could be to the entire economy.
So Jacob, the administration's constantly playing up the numbers here. Customs and Border Patrol estimate that they apprehended more than 100,000 migrants along the border. How are conditions down there right now? I know you spent a lot of time down there, but put that number in context for us between what you've seen and historically.
We should be really clear, Eamon. There is a legitimate surge of families coming to the United States to seek asylum along the southern border. I was in McAllen, Texas, just a week ago today, and I was in the Refuge Center. The Catholic Charities operates there. There were kids laying in the hallway on the floor trying to get some rest, sleeping. There were literally people out the doors because there are so many people coming into this country. But the question we have to ask over and over is why. The action that Secretary Nielsen is taking today is one that she previewed first in a background briefing, but then in on-the-record comments that were made to us, a group of reporters on Friday. And what critics of this administration are saying is that these actions that are being taken by the Secretary and President Trump, the threats to close the border, stuff they're already doing, like metering the amount of people who can legally come in and seek asylum as well, are only going to exacerbate the problem. The idea that you can close down legal ports of entry where people are supposed to come to declare asylum is only going to move those people to the places they're already saying there are crises. These areas like El Paso, in between the ports of entry, where we saw over the weekend and late last week hundreds of people sleeping on gravel under the Paso del Norte bridge. So the ultimate goal here, by the way, and it was the same goal under zero tolerance, is to indefinitely detain migrant families coming into this country to seek asylum throughout the duration of their immigration proceedings and immediately send back unaccompanied migrant children to their home countries, their countries of origin. And those are things that you can be sure that advocates for migrants coming into this country are going to continue to fight.
Hans, when we listen to the president's language and the way he talks about Mexico and the Central American country, he expects them to do more. In some terms, he always talks about them in punitive ways, that they should be punished for allowing these so-called caravans and migrants to pass through. He's recently announced that he's going to cut the State Department's aid to 3 Central American countries against the advice of some senior diplomats at the State Department. What do we know about why the president is going about this decision?
Well, it appears, and I'm going to be heavy on the appears, the president wants to escalate the costs for these countries if they don't do precisely his bidding. We saw a little bit of this in November, the last time he really made the threat to close the border with Mexico, because he wanted that new Mexican government to allow the asylum applications to take place and to have all that processing done on Mexican soil, not U.S. soil. In some ways, the president is asking these countries what he himself can't do, which is seal borders, control them. But he wants to also potentially shift blame and say this is a problem down there. The challenge with all this is that there is a long record, including from members of the president's own cabinet, his vice president, talking about the importance of these programs. They're basically counter-narcotics programs. You want to bolster the law enforcement in these countries in the Northern Triangle so you have fewer immigrants, fewer migrants trying to make the trek up north. So that's the challenge for the president. His previous budgets have talked about this, his own vice president, and yet he wants to escalate this and appears to be looking for a reason to shut down that border.
Jacob, final question to you. When we look at some of the programs that some of this money was going to, the State Department is reporting that their aid went to programs such as crime prevention in El Salvador. That in itself resulted, I believe, in about 61% decrease in homicides in a 2-year span. Does this have the potential to make things worse on our border because of the lack of prevention? When you think of so many of these families fleeing, they flee those countries because of gang violence and instability. If we help reduce the violence and the homicide rate in some of those countries, doesn't that help us?
There's no doubt about it, Eamon. I mean, that's the whole point. The idea that you would cut diplomatic ties to the Northern Triangle countries that are sending the vast majority of these asylum-seeking refugees is just backwards. As you well know, many of the gangs down in those Northern Triangle countries came from up here in the city of Los Angeles, where I sit today. And there have been efforts from gang intervention officials from places like Los Angeles to go down there, actually work with law enforcement in the communities. But it's not just law enforcement, it's education, it's other types of programs to make people want to stay, to be able to have reasons to stay in those countries and not flee here to the United States in order to seek asylum. And cutting $500 to $600 million in aid to those countries just doesn't seem to make any sense.
All right, Jacob Soboroff in Los Angeles, Hans Nichols live for us at the White House. Thank you both.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.